Hello, and welcome to episode 2 of Mike's Comic Shop Roadshow, King's Comics in Nottingham.
Well, I've been to Gotham, Wakanda, Candor, Metro, Portland, and Metropolis, Smallville, Xandar, Star City, Bloodhaven, Central City, Krakoa, Latveria, Themyscira, Opal City, Asgard, Sokovia, Campley High, Coast City, Krypton, Apocalypse, Battle Road, Keystone City, I'm a Raider. I've been everywhere, man. I've been everywhere, man. Comic books in my hands, man. I smell the back issue pages, man. Comic shops, I've seen my share, man. I've been everywhere.
Hey everyone, this second episode of the Roadshow features a comic shop in Sydney, Australia. I had the good fortune of my employer sending me there for a few weeks. This made for the perfect opportunity to visit a couple of comic shops for the Roadshow. The first one I found was King's Comics at 283 Clarence Street, Sydney, New South Wales. I highly recommend a visit to it if you ever get the opportunity. Its website, which I posted in the show notes, touts itself as, quote, Australia's most well-known comic book and pop culture specialty store, and is recognized internationally. As you'll hear in the interview with the store manager, Scott Sheens, King's Comics has been around since 1986, starting as a comic book mail order service. It has also been the recipient of the Will Eisner Spirit of Comics Retailer Award, presented at Comic-Con International in San Diego in 1996, as well as 5 international Diamond Best Practices in Comic Retailing Awards, and 3-time winners of Australia's own Ledger Awards as Retail Outlet of the Year. I was at this shop a few years ago on my last trip there, but they have changed locations, and as you will hear in the interview, it is a much bigger and well-designed shop. I will also post some photos I took while I was there. So on to the King's Comics interview.
Okay, folks, this is Mike Atchison with Mike's Comic Shop Roadshow, and we're here to record our second episode of this podcast, and I'm at King's Comics at 283 Clarence Street, Sydney, New South Wales in Australia, believe it or not. We came a long way, or I came a long way from the United States to be able to do this recording, so I wanted to introduce the store manager, Scott Sheens.
Hi, thanks for having me on.
All right, great. Thank you, Scott. And thanks for the short notice. So, as you know, there's just a short series of questions, and I want to kind of highlight the benefits of brick and mortar comic shops. So I appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you. So,
just right off the bat, what's a quick history of this store, whether in this incarnation or previous locations or anything like that?
We've had many previous locations. King's is a family-owned business by the Vlastaris family. It was started by George Vlastaris. The first store that George opened, I believe, was in 1986, but he had a mail service he started in the late 70s. The store did have one original location in the Sydney CBD. We always wanted to be that store in a central business district of a big city like Sydney. But at one point, I think throughout the 80s up until the mid-90s, George had multiple stores, or maybe just small satellite stores. As the 90s went on, and there was maybe that downturn in the comic industry in the late 90s, the stores and just real estate in general was very viable. So we made sure we just had the one major store in Sydney at any given time, and then we began our first online presence in the late 90s.
Okay, yeah. And I think I was here a couple of years ago, and I was at a different location, if I recall.
That's correct. Yes, yeah. We had this new lease in Sydney for the last 2 years, or just as COVID started. Actually, it was quite taxing for us, being that we were just opening the store, but lockdowns were happening at that time. This is a wonderful new store. It's actually located in it's one of Sydney's original office buildings. It's a heritage listed building. That was the office space for the steelworks that made the Sydney Harbour Bridge.
Oh, I see.
So it's quite cool.
Well, it's got a great aesthetic. It's got the brick walls. You got it decorated well. There's a lot of visual appeal.
A lot of original wooden floors, brickwork, with the steel beams that were actually used in the Harbour Bridge are here as well. And Christine Blastaris, George's wife, did a lot of the aesthetic signage, we wanted a New York subway kind of look to
Sure.
to the store.
Oh.
Yeah. So the aesthetics are actually done by Christine Bastar, who's one of the owners. Yeah.
Well, I'd say that you guys have nailed it.
Yeah.
So
Thank you.
what about you as the store manager? What got you into this business? Are you a comic fan from way back?
Oh,
or,
yeah. Yes, I was always a big comic fan and cartoon fan when I was younger. I was sort of a jack of all trades growing up, and I moved back to Sydney about 20 years ago. Always had one foot in the
Sure.
sort of maybe 1 foot in, 1 foot out.
Right.
Collector's room. Always just knew what I liked and things like that. And I was visiting Kings at one point when they had a position available, and I'm still here. So
Well, that's a good thing.
Yeah.
So you sort of did this already, but I mean, how would you describe your shop? Not just physically and the aesthetics like you did already, but what does this shop in particular specialize in? What kind of themes do you guys emphasize?
We do have probably a higher emphasis on single issues and more high-end collectibles as well.
Okay.
So George has always been very big on making sure we've had probably have one of the biggest backlogs of comic book back issues in more than any store in the country.
Okay.
Due to us being around so long.
Well, now you speak to my heart. The back
Yes,
issues.
yeah. We we're always endeavoring. We always endeavor to be one of the more as progressive as we can to, and as welcoming as we can to everybody at every level of collecting comics. So whether you're a very seasoned veteran with it or you're someone very new, we always wanted the store to be look new and clean and tidy and very accessible to everyone. So it's I would say mostly single issues more than say merchandise or other things that you see creep into
gaming or posters or different shops have different themes or emphases, but
it is.
This is great.
Our shipments always encompass like a lot of indie comics as well. Being very supportive of the Aussie comic industry, but also I don't think we've never not gotten a lot of quantities on a lot of indie titles too. So a lot of people, I think they come in just thinking it's purely Marvel and DC, not knowing even about Image or anything like that, but we do get at least a small amount of.
And I've really migrated from the big two more to indie stuff as I've grown older. So you, as an individual, Scott, what would you consider to be your favorite comic series or your favorite comic character? Maybe a favorite OGN?
I was very big on my X-Men when I was younger. I mean, some of my first comics were a real mixed bag. My mother used to collect comics in the 60s, a lot of Gold Key comics and things like that. So she, I also used to love to draw. So I used to buy a lot of things when I was younger, just in order to draw something out of the comic.
Do you have a favorite X-Men character?
Wolverine is my favorite character. I'm a big Spider-Man fan too. So one of my most treasured graphic novels, I think, is Eric Larsen's Revenge of the Sinister Six.
Oh,
so it's it's a pretty random run, but it was just something that I had. It was one of my first trades I ever got when they first started doing some early trade prints in the 90s, and it's just still my favorite book. So.
Outstanding.
Yeah.
So, if you had to give one reason, why should folks come to your store here? Why should folks come to King's Comics?
I would like to say customer service and the staff is what I really prioritize here too. We have everybody that's work here is very passionate about the industry, about comics. We love to be able to help people get into it. It's not that judging environment. That's that welcoming environment where we can get you into the medium and guide people too. It's a tricky thing. A lot of people needs that little bit of guidance when they approach the medium of periodicals or maybe just getting an original graphic novel is a better thing. But we really just want people to get into comic books and that medium of comics. And
that's good because I think we've all experienced that sort of off-putting feeling of comic elitism or snobbery. If you don't know everything about it, then people kind of but having open arms and a welcoming attitude. That's really great.
We're all, to a degree, all brick and mortar stores, but I mean, maybe more so in the States. There's a higher population, there's a bigger density of people, so you can open a smaller store. Maybe it is just a niche little shop. You'll go to some, which I have been in the States in previous years, and found that maybe you just do want to open a small store, and they have a slight elitism to them. We don't want the little boys clubs of the 90s or anything like that. But it's I like to hire and focus on the staff being knowledgeable and welcoming to everybody.
Gotcha. Well, since I am so far away from my usual stomping grounds, this question has more meaning, I think, than usual. What titles or publishers or creators are popular in this area? Who's your most popular, like I said, publishers, creators, titles?
Oh, I would say we even budgetary-wise, we start with the big two. We start with Marvel and DC, and really our customer base has been on par with both. I think Image will be the next one along. Creators, it's always been a bit of a mix of who's trending, really, with creators. I wouldn't say there's something springs to mind that's definitively, it's always your usual suspects when it comes to those sorts of things. But we do have some local creators that are very popular, like Nicholas Scott, who's an artist that lives in Sydney. He's worked predominantly with DC, and then we have Tom Taylor in Melbourne. It's a fantastic writer. We've got David Hazan as well.
You just read my mind, because that segues straight into my next question. And it's like, first, do you hold special events here? It's a two-part question. Do you hold any special events, or do you ever host creaters? Do creators, have they ever had an opportunity like the ones that you? I mean, Nicole Scott and Tom Taylor, they're household names in the U.S. as well.
Yes, actually, we've been fortunate to be able to host both of them since we've opened this new store in the last 2 years. In previous years, many times to what we're able to fit into just our store, but we've always managed to do signings and host Free Comic Book Day each year. We would sometimes have a panel of these guests to do a signing as well. But they're George and Christina really seasoned and experienced with this. They opened the first comic conventions in Australia in 1992, which were OzCon. Okay. So they were the first people to start a comic book model in Australia up until about 1998. But they've for just about everyone you can think of. I think the first show was at actually the Sydney Opera House. Which is pretty cool. Yeah.
So George and Christine, they're the owners, you say?
Yes, they are. Yeah.
Okay. First of all, pass on my regards to them for allowing us to do this interview. And I hate that I missed them
at a comic convention today.
Okay, great. And but it sounds like they're kind of like the OGs for the
comic
shop.
They very much are. Yeah.
I wasn't even sure if OG was something that was a term that was used.
There's been many. A lot of our major cities, you'd be surprised, do have some pretty long running brick and mortar stores. But I think it's pretty impressive that George and Chris started their first conventions and won a lot of awards. George won a Spirit of Comics, an Eisner Award in 1996.
Is that
it was presented to him at San Diego Comic Con. So that was sort of like an Eisner, like a retailer orientated Eisner Award, which is pretty awesome. We've won about 5 or 6 Diamond Retailer Awards as well for various things like our newsletter, our loyalty club, and our layout of our store and things like that.
I think now I didn't realize it at first, but maybe I'm playing ball out of my league here. I didn't realize all of these things.
We're again getting back to the staff. We're all very proud of how the shop is laid out and how easy it is to find everything. And even with this new store, we've tried things a little differently by putting our graphic novels by genre, like you'll see in some bookstores instead. Right. So maybe you'd find even in Barnes & Noble and others, maybe they've got a section for graphic novels, but we decided to have a crime section, have a drama section, and get, I think that some of the problems I've seen with shoppers that are more casual shoppers is they don't know, if you do your store by publisher, they don't know who the publishers are. They don't really know what it is, and you need to display them a bit more. And maybe by having a fantasy section, a kids section, we've actually got this wonderful kids section in our store that's built like a tree, and it's something that's just visually really cool for the kids, and the kids can stick around it. And we've found that the sales have been really good, and a lot of indie publishers and graphic novels have been seen because people are going straight to those sections.
I mean, there's a lot of I think you're spot on with that. A lot of readers, it used to be people. I think most people just followed a certain publisher or certain brand, but a lot of people really follow creators now. Yeah. And they follow genres too.
If I had more space, there'd be so many more sections I would do. Maybe creator, an Aussie one, other different genres and things like that. Okay. And I think with the superhero stuff, they know what they want. They know the story, they know the character that they want, and they go straight to it. Yeah. But, our new layout has been really, really great. Yeah.
Well, the last, and I guess you could argue the most important question is that, full disclosure here, I asked Scott already what individual issue, OGN, or trade paperback could he recommend to me to read and review for the second segment of this podcast.
I was recommending Nottingham, that was written by David Hazan. It's sort of a medieval noir, like a twist on the Robin Hood story, where the sheriff of Nottingham is like a detective hunting down the merry men of more serial killers in a way, and it's David's a local talent as well. Okay. It's produced by I believe it's Mad Cave Studios, and we've had David in for a signing. Got a lot of the issues CGC'd as well, so I'd highly recommend that. It's something that I think would be good to pick up and read while you're here. So
I think it's right up my alley. So it's like you were in my head, man.
Yeah.
So again, this is King's Comics, probably one of the premier comic shops in Australia, especially in the Sydney, Greater Sydney, New South Wales area.
It is. We've found a lot of stores have shut down. Like Sydney is a big city. We have a lot of outer suburbs and boroughs and things. But prior to COVID, I believe really like leases have been and just the cost of living has gone up. We actually lost 2 to 3 comic stores over the last 7 or 8 years, just due to different reasons. So we're only one of 2 kind of long-standing comic shops in all of Sydney, which is a shame. But we do attend all the different comic conventions around Sydney. We have a pretty progressive online store and subscription system.
You've got a strong presence, in the industry, in the area, in the country.
We ship all over.
And that's great. And for anybody listening to this podcast, if they're ever visiting Australia or the Sydney area, I highly recommend coming into this shop. It's got a great look to it, got great personal service, as you can tell already. So once again, I want to thank you, Scott, for taking part in this interview.
Mike. Thank you.
And again, thank George and Christine for
I will, yes.
And we'll talk soon.
Excellent. Thanks a lot. Thanks for having me.
You bet.
Okay, once again, I am joined by my Campus Comics cast co-hosts, Scott and Shaad. That's a lot of C's and S's.
Yes.
Who got their hands on a copy of the book recommended by Scott Sheens. He was the manager down there at this the store in Sydney, Australia.
Literally down there.
Yeah, down there. Yeah, literally. Another Scott too. A lot of S's again. So Nottingham is the book Scott and Shaad got a hold of so that they could help me review this story. So as they say down under, how you going, mate? I don't know if you guys have ever heard them say that.
No.
They don't say how's it going. They say how you going. And I remember I used to work with a guy from Australia, and I was always like, "You mean how's it going?" No. So yeah, again, just culture adjustment being down there, even though it was very minor. So a quick rundown of this book. Nottingham is published by Mad Cave Studios and is written by David Hazan, which is a local for Australia, with art by Connery Volk and colors provided by Luca Romana. Letters are provided by Jomet Gill. My only request of Scott Sheens, he was the manager there at King's Comics, was that he would recommend a book by a homegrown Australian creator, and it came through because, like I said, David Hazan is based in Melbourne, Australia. Hazan and Volk are both somewhat newcomers to the comics industry. And I say somewhat, but I think Hazan's like literally, this is his first major work. But they've already made their mark. This book has really had some good critical reviews. Like I said, Nottingham is their first full-length comic work and has been a surprise hit, shattering Mad Cave Studios' previous sales records and earning multiple printings. It's also worth noting that the artist Shane Connery Volk is the lead singer and songwriter for a Canadian rock band called One Bad Son. So there you go, Shaad.
Okay, I'll have to check them out.
Yep. Yeah. A reminder, there will be full spoilers. So if you'd like to read along with us, please read it yourself first and then come back and listen. Let's jump right in.
Well, one thing I will say, actually, I'm going to interrupt you here real quick, because in the last previews catalog, we didn't actually talk about it, but there was a solicit for a comic that is a in between, like leading. I can't remember if it was leading into volume 3 of Nottingham or after volume 3 of Nottingham. So we're reading the first volumes. This has already had 2 more volumes and future plans. So this series is still going on, and it's been going on for a while now. So
that's a good point. And there's also the spinoff called Nottingham Tales.
Yeah.
So Nottingham was originally published in 5 individual issues from 2021 from Mad Cave Studios. The softcover that I purchased from King's Comics is the first printing of a trade paperback titled Nottingham, Volume 1, Death and Taxes, and collects the first 5 issues of the series, totaling 152 pages. The title continued publication through issue 10, and I know, Scott, you just mentioned that it's had subsequent volumes. So I know that the second trade has issues 6 through 10. Now, this is just me looking online and seeing if I could find, what else is out there right now. So a quick solicit summary. In this twisted medieval noir, the sheriff of Nottingham hunts a serial killer with a penchant for tax collectors. The sheriff's investigation makes him the target of England's most nefarious power brokers. That's to say nothing of the merry men, terrorists lurking among the trees of Sherwood, led by an enigma known only as Hood. So that's the solicit summary. And that leads us to our synopsis part 1, which is essentially issue 1 of the series. And Scott will take it from there.
So we have grisly masked killers are running amok through England, murdering tax collectors in the name of King Richard the Lionheart while he is away on the Third Crusade. They call themselves Merry Men, but they're not the ones we know. The Merry Men are an equal opportunity group, killing not just tax collectors, but traitors, fornicators, and infidels as well. In a flip of the script, Everard Blackthorne is the sheriff of Nottingham and the good guy in this version of the Robin Hood folklore. He is hunting down the killers and investigating the crime scenes. The first crime scene is that of a murdered tax collector, which leads the sheriff to the manor of Lady Marian and Lord Guy Gisborne. It is there we get our first glimpse of Sir Robert of Locksley, a.k.a. Robin Hood. The sheriff meets his match in wits with his interrogation of Lady Marian, even though he was confident that the strands of red hair found on the body of the tax collector were that of Lady Marian. Prince John, King Richard the Lionheart's younger brother and heir, is the enemy of the Merry Men due to his greed and taxes. They do their works in the name of Richard, who they think is being betrayed by Prince John. Foiled by Marian, the sheriff and his right-hand man, Captain Alan Dale, go after every red-haired man in the Shire, finally coming across the culprit, Will Scarlet, a card-carrying merry man. Although brutally interrogated by the sheriff, Scarlet didn't give away the location of the merry men right away, but Hood is worried he will. One of the masked merry men, presumably Hood, breaks into the dungeon where he is held and bludgeons him to death. This issue also gives a little better insight into Hood and Marian's relationship.
Yeah, I just wanted to say on my notes that this is obviously a very new take on the Robin Hood lore. It's certainly not your Disney Robin Hood. The sheriff is usually seen as the antagonist in typical Robin Hood stories, but not so here. Not only are their roles as protagonist and antagonist swapped, the point of view and the focus is on the sheriff of Nottingham. It really reminds me of how, I don't know if you guys ever read the book or seen the play Wicked, but it really changed the perspective of the Wicked Witch of the West and made her into more of a sympathetic character. I see that in this book here.
You say them as flipped, though I kind of took it as there's no good guys, is the way that when I read it. It's like, this is a book full of bad guys, and you just have to decide whether which bad guy you're gonna root for. You're gonna root for the mass murdering Robin Hood, or you're gonna root for the really horrible sheriff. And I still ended up rooting for the mass murderer in the end. Spoilers. But I was just like, I liked that from the way I read it. There was no good guys. There was no hope for it. It was just a hopeless bunch of people. And I was like, I like how dark and bad this is in that way.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. That's actually one of my comments, is that there's nobody to be on the side of in this book. You know, Robin is not giving to the poor. He's sending money overseas to King Richard, right? Mm-hmm. The sheriff is working for Prince John, who is corrupt and over collecting taxes and is greedy. And the sheriff is there just enforcing the law of somebody else that you can't like. So he's just kind of like this guy who's in this job and has no choice but to be in this job as the sheriff. So it's just like, man, there's no hero. There's no hero at all.
Yeah. No, it certainly takes the whole idea of heroism and turns it on its face. I mean, I still root for, because of my history in law enforcement, I was always law and order type person. So I'm going to root for the sheriff. Even though sheriff, I mean, of course, this is whatever, the 1200s or something like that. So their idea of what's allowable, there's not a whole lot of, they certainly aren't reading Miranda rights whenever they apprehend their people. Right. But I almost have to lean or favor the sheriff, and what the sheriff's, he's got a bad history. He's had his moral compass has been jaded for a lot of reasons. So, but I can see him still as the sympathetic character, as opposed to the Hood, who's basically deliberately taking the money from the poor, from the rich, not giving it to the poor, but funding King Richard's crusade in hopes of, I don't know what, future benefits from the king when he returns. I'm not sure. I know I read an interview with David Hazan. He basically says that whenever he was trying to come up with the storyline, he just asked himself, what if we do a Robin Hood story where the sheriff is a cop that hunts down the merry men who are seen as a sort of terrorist stalking Nottingham's tax collectors? So that really did sum up what was going on.
Yeah.
You ready for part 2?
Yeah.
So the sheriff's investigation expands to include the brutal death of Will Scarlet. As the sheriff investigates the murder scene of Scarlet, he notes the injury to his head was on the right side, indicating a left-handed assailant. We get a glimpse into Blackthorn's past as a crusader serving Richard the Lionheart, and how that has hardened him. The investigation reveals Scarlet's death was an inside job, and the sheriff's captain, Alan Dale, was a traitor.
We're kind of clued into the same evidence that the sheriff is observing through his dialogue. So you're kind of seeing this as an actual detective story. You knew they were going to. I knew there was going to be a betrayal in the book, but I didn't expect it to be Captain Dale. I was surprised by that.
It was exciting for me. I think we talked about this off camera, but the Alan Dale being, historically being part of more on the Merryman side of things, and him immediately being a guard was off-putting to me, and like I don't get this, and I was like, this can't like stick. He has to, at least if he doesn't turn coat and be a traitor, there has to be some sort of change that makes him do that. And then when it was revealed that, I was like, okay, cool, we're on track again. I like this.
Yeah.
On this issue, I really liked when they're interrogating the keymaster, and he keeps repeating his story, and then they're telling him what really happened, like feeding him, like, no, this is what happened, and he's like, no, this, and he goes, I wasn't even supposed to have that shift. He just kind of like blurted out.
It's like he didn't even plan on snitching off Captain Dale. Yeah. I thought the writing was good in that way.
Yeah, it's very well written. I mean, this is as a page turner in that way. It's a very smooth read, especially for someone as new as this guy is as a writer. He's a very smooth writer.
Yep. Have you guys thought about the art, or what do you think of it?
Love it.
It's very stylized, very sharp. All the characters feel like they kind of have very sharp angles to them. It definitely is not it definitely doesn't detract from it at all. So I like that. There's some times where it's like everybody looks like they're bleeding from the eyes, or crying all the time. And that's kind of weird. So it's like, am I missing something? Is this how the artist drew it? So occasionally that would take me a little bit out of the story, but other than that, it was very solid. So
I put it kind of reminded me of like Sam Keith or Richard Corbin, kind of either in kind of a mix of the two of their styles together.
Yeah, I think it was. I don't know if I read it or if I thought of this, but it just seems grungy. It is stylized, but the artist is able to tell the story really well. There's no confusion from panel to panel, which to me is as important as the style itself. Mm-hmm. And to your point, Scott, the inky black eyes of the sheriff, that's the bleeding part that I remember thinking, why? I mean, it's like the whites of his eyes are black, or maybe it's just that the pupils are taking up the entire, and it just, and that lended well, I think, to the image you're meant to see here. So one thing about the masks, they were creepy as heck. I mean,
yes,
the big grin, it was like a half medieval, helmet or helm or whatever, and then half Guy Fawkes V for Vendetta mask with the big, grin. So I thought that was well thought out as far as design.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, so part 3 is Shaad.
All right, part 3. Although Captain Dale betrayed the sheriff, he did it to protect his family. On the run, he hides in an abbey where we first meet Friar Tuck, who is protecting Dale. We learn of Blackthorn and Tuck's past and learn that there is no love lost between them. Tuck forced Blackthorn to join the crusade years prior to avoid prosecution for his own crimes. Friar Tuck and his monks believe the merry men really do give to the poor. They don't. And so they fight off Blackthorn's forces. In the end, the sheriff and friar end in the fight and find Captain Dale hanging in the monastery with a confession note. In the final scene of the issue, Little John, Robin Hood, and Marion conspire to rob the winnings set aside for the upcoming tournament at Guy Gisborne's estate. Hood has bigger plans than stealing, though.
Yeah.
The design of Little John is just, I don't know if it's in this spot specifically, but he's just this hulking mass and like his head isn't even above his shoulders. Is like his shoulders even go over, his head's just like chilling out in between his arms. And so like he just looks giant in this story.
Yeah, he does. I think they represented that really well. I mean, again, this is so far removed from what we've seen on the movies or Disney cartoons or whatever. But what I'm really amazed at is just how devious Lady Marian is. I mean, she you want to think at least of her as being the one of the good people, and she's wanting to but she's already conspiring to win those, like you said, win the winnings on that, or steal the winnings from that tournament. Yeah, so you really got a really good sense of just how bad Hood was in this. I guess it was towards the last part of this issue. His big grin about he's, conspiratorial plans. Yeah, he just there. It's not like he's a anti-hero. He's just a bad guy, in my opinion.
Yeah.
It's just so indoctrinated in my mind that Robin Hood is the good guy. He is always the good guy. I've never seen him in anything where he's the bad guy.
So it's polarizing.
So it's just like I can't wrap my brain around it. I can't. There was a little of this in in the Kieran Gillen series that we read the first volume of about Camelot.
Oh, Once in Future.
Once in Future, thank you. I couldn't remember the name. Where it's like King Arthur's supposed to be the good guy. Well, I feel more strongly about Robin Hood supposed to be the good guy. If I remember right, later in one of those volumes, Robin Hood comes back for just like either an issue or something like that. And we
Once in Future. Okay.
Once in Future, yeah.
He does.
Maybe. Yeah, and I kind of struggle with it the same way, because he's supposed to be the good guy. So yeah, I haven't been able to get past that for this story. So
I totally get it. I get it. And I think I was more hung up on King Arthur in that Once in Future because he was not just, I don't know that I'd say a bad guy, but he was a zombie. I mean, it was just It's not what you and plus the whole premise was that he was. What's the saying? King Arthur will return in Britain's greatest hour of need or whatever. And the way they spun that was that maybe he caused it to be Britain's greatest hour of need. So I had a hard time with that just as much as you are having with Robin Hood here, I think. So we got part 4 now with Shaad.
Part 4. The sheriff is concerned about the plan to lure out the merry men with the tournament prize, not knowing the number of foes they'd be up against once they are in the castle grounds. But Guy of Gisborne is not dissuaded. After the jousting and dueling, Sir Robert of Locksley, a.k.a. Robin Hood, shows off his archery talents, first by hitting bullseye left-handed, which raises the eyebrow of the sheriff, but also hits the bullseye right-handed, which spoils the sheriff's suspicions that it was Hood who killed Scarlet. As expected, the merry men, disguised in the audience, start their attack under the leadership of Little John. It quickly becomes apparent that they are not there for the prize, but to take over Nottingham itself. The group retreats to the castle while defending themselves at the gate. The sheriff notices Lady Marian is wielding her sword with her left hand and has her arrested for treason and the murder of Will Scarlet.
Yeah, this was my favorite issue, I think, of the bunch.
Yeah, it was pretty good. There's in the trade, there's the covers of each issue are on there, and there's a cover for part 4 of the sheriff sitting in a throne of the merrymen's masks. And I thought that's probably the best, like, just kind of image that I had seen in the whole book. I was like, that's a pretty awesome looking image.
Yeah.
With all those smiling weird masks, and he's just sitting on top of it. And as this story progresses, he starts looking almost like a vulture. Like the sheriff just starts getting bigger, and he's got that cape that's kind of feathery. And so he's just like looking nasty and vulture-y on top of that throne of masks. And I was like, I like this.
Yeah, I mean, I had never heard of the artist before, and I'll look for if this Shane Connery Volk, if I see him again, I'll probably, even though I'm not, I'm more of the plain Jane house style kind of guy, but I can say that this is the kind of stylization that I would be in favor of, mostly because the storytelling is good. But I'll look anything I see with him again, I'll probably be looking to pick it up.
Now, one thing that's interesting to me, and I have not done any research to see if there's any actual relationship or not. So you have Shane Connery Volk. All right, there's a BBC Robin Hood series where Robin Hood was played by Jason Connery. Jason Connery is the son of Sean Connery, right, who has also played Robin Hood and like Robin Hood and Marian, or one of those movies as well. So you have to wonder, with him sticking Connery in his name, if he is or is not some distant relationship to Sean Connery or not. I didn't research that at all. I have no clue, but it's amazing that I assume he, has Connery there, where it's like it's David Hazan, but it's Shane Connery Volk, as opposed to just Shane Volk. So I would be interested to know the answer to that. And if I wasn't so lazy, then I probably would have looked it up.
I thought the same thing. I mean, it just seems like more than just coincidence that the name Connery, and this is a British-based story. Yeah, I definitely thought that. Now, like I said, like you, I didn't research this artist / musician's history, but could be.
I will tell you that he doesn't have a lot of credits under it's Nottingham, Tales from Nottingham, and then Grim Tales from the Cave, which is also a Mad Cave thing that came out last year. It was a one shot. So he's only done Mad Cave work at this point.
Yeah, I mean that's what I remember on my research, is that Hazan and him both, this is their big break, and man, they hit it well. There's
also something called Shiver, which, let's see, is that also Mad Cave? I can't find a publisher on it, and it's exclusively, he's listed as the author. It is, what is it? I don't know what it is. I'm trying to find any description at all of it, and there's like not even a description. It says Shiver, Kindle. Okay, it's a Kindle edition, so I don't know if it's a comic or if it's a short story or what. You can read it for free. It must be a book, because it is. Yeah, it must be not a comic. It must be a book.
I know we're way off track now, but Shiver is also the name of a song by Shane Connery Volk.
Well, maybe that's what it is. Okay, so but it's on Kindle Unlimited, so I don't know.
Maybe he wrote a story to go along with it.
Maybe.
I don't know if you guys. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was just say usually they have like a look inside where you can see like the first page or something of it, but he doesn't have that. So yeah. Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
Just one thing I liked of many things I liked about this issue was this morality tale of the wolf and the shepherd, and it's kind of like the underlying moral. Like one of those fables, but it reminded me of the scorpion and the frog. You have to trust him because it's you have to. The scorpion or the frog and the scorpion are trying to cooperate, but then in the end, the scorpion's nature forces him to kill the frog. But I just kind of like that little added touch to that issue. Lots of action too in this penultimate issue. Okay, any other comments?
Nope.
All right, part 5. The merry men break through the castle's defense, and while Gisborne and his guards are holed up in the Great Hall, the sheriff goes to the dungeon to head off Robin Hood, who plans to kill Larry Marion to keep her quiet about the location of the merry men's hideout. The sheriff has to fight Little John to get there, and that is no small feat. After getting past Little John, the sheriff faces off with the masked Robin Hood. In the process, Robin Hood's mask breaks, and the sheriff learns Robin Hood's real identity is Sir Robert of Locksley. During this, Marion frees herself and engages in a 3-way fight with them, which, by the way, that was kind of wild to see 3 of them. You didn't know who was fighting who. But anyway, This 3-way fight ended with Hood holding Marion hostage. During the standoff, we get a long dialogue where we learn Hood's motivations, his true motivations, which was not to give stolen money to the poor, but to fund King Richard's crusade. In his attempt to free Marion, he shoots her and Hood with arrows, but Hood gets away to fight another day. In the final scene, Lord Gisborne is elevated in the eyes of the people of Nottingham for successfully defending the Great Hall. Robin Hood, now known by all as Sir Robert of Locksley, is branded an outlaw, is in hiding with Little John, and has a hugely increased following. Lady Marion is under house arrest and recuperating from her injuries. And in the final scene, the Sheriff of Nottingham explains to his soon-to-be new captain that people, quote, would rather believe in the myth of a man of noble blood fighting for them than the reality that they never really mattered to him in the first place. Thoughts on this final issue of this overall story?
Other than saying that I don't really feel like it was like a surprise revelation to anybody whenever you see that it's Sir Robert of Locksley. I thought it was pretty clear in the issues leading up to it. I guess it was just a surprise to the sheriff, but the reader knows, everybody else knows who's going on. So maybe that just didn't quite have the impact that it could have had if there wasn't such a storied history with this character, or if they didn't surprise it's somebody else or something like that.
Yeah.
I thought it wrapped up well, knowing that it is somewhat an ongoing, at least. I mean, we got 10 issues of it. It wrapped up as a nice, trade in one kind of collection. And then when I went out to go, is there more besides the tales that I know is currently being solicited? I was like, oh no, there's a volume 2. And so I thought that it was just like the rest of the writing, that was wrapped up nicely enough to give you a full story in 5 issues. But then also you're surprised and excited to know that there's more if you want it.
Yeah, I thought they did a good job of keeping the bad guy alive. And one thing I thought was interesting is that, and this is so typical, if you remember, Lord Gisborne, Guy Gisborne, is kind of a ding dong. He's not the greatest lord or ruler ever, but because he successfully defended the people, he's their hero right now. So he's eating that up. Mm-hmm. And of course, it's very. I thought the quote at the end there by the sheriff about people would rather believe in the myth of a man that's fighting for them than the reality that they. I thought that had some social relevance. Mm-hmm. I mean, people believe what they want to believe, and it's not too hard to get them to believe it. So yeah. I thought that was pretty poignant, and I have to give credit to the writer on that. Yeah, so overall, I just thought this was a really good book. I thought the historical accuracy was better than a lot of books you read that have an historical bent to them. The Crusades. I even looked up online, and all of these dates lined up with the Third Crusade. Richard the Lionheart, he was actually out on crusade at this time, and they did their homework. It was in Prince John from, when we grew up watching these movies and Disney shows about Robin Hood, we thought of Prince John as being sort of a one-dimensional character. I hope in this next volume that we actually see Prince John and maybe see just how morally ambiguous he is as a character. Is he really doing it for the good of the country, or is he doing it for the good of himself? Whatever they're, as far as the,
especially with the trying to turn what we've known as the bad guys into gooder guys, better guys. It'll be interesting to see what they do with Prince John, and do they try to make him a squeaky clean an actual good guy, and try to spin that a little bit differently too.
Yeah. All right, Scott, did you have any final thoughts on it?
I was just going to mention that other series, I think you maybe said this, but it's Tales from Nottingham.
Yeah.
And it's on its third issue, and the solicit that says that it will lead directly into the climatic events of Nottingham Volume 3.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Now, that book is also not by the creative team on the Nottingham proper book. So it's a different creative team.
Right, I did see that.
Tales from Nottingham.
Yep. All right. Ratings.
All right, I'll go first because I'm probably going to be the low man again. Again, it's too entrenched in my mind to see Robin Hood as the bad guy. So it's not like it's something I don't know that I'll read the second volume. So I'm at a fine 6.0. And that's I'm almost feel like I'm being generous at that grade. So I probably actually want to go a little lower than that, but yeah, I'll just say fine 6.0.
That's fair. Shaad?
I gave it an 8.5, very fine plus. There were a couple of things more like language. There was some like cursing, and they called the redhead person Ginger. I don't know if that is like terms for that time frame. That kind of took me out of it because I thought that was newer terms, and that was like, if I was being nitpicky, that was the things that threw me off was that.
I remember that same thing. Yep.
I wrote it down as like the first thing that took me out of it, and then it ended up being the only thing that took me out of it. So it's like, well, if there's one thing in 5 issues that took me out, that's not too bad. But no, I love this, and my volume 2 is in my list of when I go to different comic shops, I like to have some trades that I'm looking for, and so if I see volume 2 out and about, I'm definitely picking it up.
Yeah, I think we got lucky, at least in my perspective. This was I don't know, in this, as we go on, if we'll get stories that are as good as what this one was, but I'm giving it an 8.5 as well. Very fine plus. I thought it's got all the elements of things that I like in a non-superhero story. It's got some historical relevance. It's fairly accurate. It's not cookie cutter type stuff, and they took some chances, and it paid off. So 8.5 is at the very least. I just don't think I could go touch on that near mint side. This is not something I'd give the near mint. I think there's some proving to be done in, if this is a storyline or if these creators can repeat their success in the future.
Yeah.
All right. So first, I want to thank you two, Scott and Shaad, for helping me out. And I want to give thanks to King's Comics and the store manager, Scott Sheeds, and to the owners, George and Christine Vlastaras. It's Vlastaras. So doing my best to pronounce that, but really gracious folks to let me do the interview there. And again, it's a lot of fun when you got a group together, and we do this a lot on our podcast proper of Campus Comics Cast, but doing it with a specific mission and theme, I think is even fun in its own way. So anyway, Scott, you want to give your contact information?
Just track me down at bergcomics.com. Has all my contact information.
All right. And how about you, Shaad?
You can find me on Facebook, Shaad Schubert, SHAAD SCHUBERT.
And I'm Mike Atchison, which you can get me on email at m.atchison90@gmail.com or Mike Atchison5 on Twitter. All right. Thanks, and we'll talk to you all next time.
Well, I've been everywhere, man. I've been everywhere, man. Comic books in my hands, man. The smell of back of shoe pages, man. Comic shops, I've seen my share, man.